Hey everyone, I'm going to continue with the book Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. I did read the first paragraph or so regarding Trina, who was this young 14-year-old who had a real tumultuous upbringing, in the sense where her father abused her sexually, her mother allowed the abuse to go on, her sisters had to look out for her during this time, but they were so young and unable to look out for her after her mother died from her father's abuse. The father, when he would beat the mom and she'd pass out, he'd take a stick and stick it down her throat to revive her, and just to endure more beating. So this was her daughter named Trina, who grew up in this crazy household, okay? And unfortunately, her life did not turn out too well. And the last paragraph that I read regarding her situation, what happened to her was, eventually it was she and her twin sisters, they had to run and leave the home, so they were sleeping out in the streets. The older sisters couldn't take them in because when they were taken in, the older sister's husband began sexually abusing her. It was just a really terrible time for her. She and another friend of hers went to two boys' house. I think they were brothers, who they had liked, and the mother had forbid the boys to see Trina. However, Trina climbed through the window one evening, one late night, and she lit a match so that she can see her way through the home. And when she did that, the place caught a fire and the two boys died. And that's where we left off. They died, and Trina was traumatized by the boys' death and could barely speak. When the police arrested her, she was so non-functional and listless that her appointed lawyer thought she was incompetent to stand trial. Defendants who are deemed incompetent can't be tried in adversarial criminal proceedings, meaning that the state can't prosecute them unless they become well enough to defend themselves. Criminally accused people facing trial are entitled to treatment and services. However, Trina's lawyer failed to file the appropriate motions or present evidence to support an incompetency determination for Trina. The lawyer, who was subsequently disbarred and jailed for unrelated criminal misconduct, also never changed the state's decision to try Trina as an adult. So they did not change that, even though he was disbarred and jailed. So Trina was forced to stand trial for second-degree murder in an adult courthouse. At trial, Frances Newsom testified against Trina in exchange for the charges against her being dropped. Trina was convicted of second-degree murder, and the trial moved to the sentencing phase. I believe that Frances Newsom was the girl that she entered the house with. Delaware County Circuit Judge Howard Reed found that Trina had no intent to kill, but under Pennsylvania's law, the judge could not take the absence of intent into account during sentencing. He could not consider Trina's age, mental illness, poverty, the abuse she had suffered, or the tragic circumstances surrounding the fire. Pennsylvania's sentencing law was inflexible for those convicted of second-degree murder. Mandatory life imprisonment without the possibility of parole was the only sentence Judge Reed expressed. Judge Reed expressed serious misgivings about the sentence he was forced to impose. "This is the saddest case I've ever seen," he wrote. "For a tragic crime committed at 14, Trina was condemned to die in prison." After sentencing, Trina was immediately shipped off to an adult prison for women. Now 16, Trina walked through the gates of the State Correctional Institution at Muncie, an adult prison for women, terrified, still suffering from trauma and mental illness. and intensely vulnerable, with the knowledge that she would never leave. Prison spared Trina the uncertainty of homelessness, but presented new dangers and challenges. Not long after she arrived at Muncie, a male correctional officer pulled her into a secluded area and raped her. The crime was discovered when Trina became pregnant. As is often the case, the correctional officer was fired but not criminally prosecuted. Trina remained in prison and gave birth to a son. Like hundreds of women who give birth while in prison, Trina was completely unprepared for the stress of childbirth. She delivered her baby while handcuffed to a bed. It was until 2008 that most states abandoned the practice of shackling or handcuffing incarcerated women during delivery. Trina's baby boy was taken away from her and placed in foster care. After the series of events, the fire, the imprisonment, the rape, the traumatic birth, and then the seizure of her son, Trina's mental health deteriorated further. Over the years, she became less functional and more mentally disabled. Her body began to spasm and quiver uncontrollably until she required a cane and then a wheelchair. By the time she had turned 30, prison doctors diagnosed her with multiple sclerosis, intellectual disability, and mental illness related to trauma. Trina had filed a civil suit against the officer who raped her, and the jury awarded her a judgment of $62,000. The guard appealed, and the court reversed the verdict because the correctional officer had not been permitted to tell the jury that Trina was in prison for murder. Consequently, Trina never received any financial aid or services from the state to compensate her for being violently raped by one of its correctional officers. In 2014, Trina turned 52. She has been in prison for 38 years. She is one of the nearly 500 people in Pennsylvania who have been condemned to mandatory life imprisonment without parole for crimes they were accused of committing when they were between the ages of 13 and 17. It is the largest population of child offenders condemned to die in prison in any single jurisdiction in the world. So again, this book, Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson, this amazing attorney, again, who really has dedicated and committed his life to fighting for those who have gone through situations like Trina, being 14 years old, and are being sent given life in prison, and not having the proper representation or just representation that they deserve, bottom line. And a lot of the teenagers are being sent to prison, life in prison without parole, and spend the rest of their lives in prison. So this lawyer has spent his life fighting for those people. Yes. And I'm going to end right there. So I want to thank you guys for listening, and join me next week when we continue with Just Mercy. I'm just going to read excerpts of this book here, parts that I think that really stand out. And there's so many of them, so many stories in here. And to hear them, they're just heartbreaking. You know, it's just like, wow. And mainly happening to our black and brown boys and girls. So, have an amazing evening, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.